Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Vincent Kim, a senior counsel from the World Bank, and a warm welcome to everyone here in the room, and also thank you for all audience from joining by online, and we truly appreciate your interest and support. And we're thrilled to have an incredible um, lineup of speakers who will explore the findings of the literature review, discuss the critical relevance for people-centered approach to the justice technology, and outline the next step in this collaboration effort. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items for those joining us online via Teams. Please use the Q&A function to submit your question. We'll address them during the Q&A portion at the end. And for those here in person, feel free to jot down your questions to ask later. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Christopher Stevens, the Senior Vice President and Group General Counsel at the World Bank Group, who will deliver the opening remarks. Chris, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks for that, and good morning, everyone. It's really an honor to be here, and thank you all for joining the launch of the Advancing Access to Justice via Information and Communications Technology Literature Review. That's a mouthful. Today's event isn't just about presenting a new report. It's about critically examining whether our ongoing global discussions around digital justice are delivering the outcomes they promise or falling short. So special thanks to the Korea World Bank Partnership Facility, whose generous support has made this collaboration possible. KWPF's investment highlights a shared conviction that, when thoughtfully and efficiently implemented, digital innovations can genuinely expand access to justice to those who've historically been left behind, a critically important part of our mission to alleviate poverty on a livable planet and furthering the goal of shared prosperity. The World Bank has been engaged deeply in justice-centered reforms for over 25 years, with dozens of projects demonstrating the profound impact that functioning legal systems have on the development agenda and in underpinning civil societies. When these systems fail, vulnerable communities suffer disproportionately, resulting in the denial or obstacles to rights or benefits or opportunities that are intended to avoid or alleviate poverty, bolster growth, create jobs, or support shared prosperity. A strong partner in this effort has been the World Justice Project. Their Rule of Law Index has long been a global benchmark for understanding justice challenges and providing guidance and strong incentives for reforms. This collaboration builds on that foundation, including by using data-driven analytics to create practical tools that demonstrate how technology can be used to close justice gaps. And so I'd like to take a moment to thank Dr. Alejandro Ponce and congratulate him on his recent appointment as Executive Director of WJP. A well-earned recognition of Alex's leadership in advancing evidence-based justice reform. And of course, I'd like to also recognize Grace and Daniela for their outstanding research contributions, which have been instrumental in shaping today's discussion. But turning to the report, let's start by acknowledging the principal premise. Digital technologies have extraordinary potential to transform justice systems, faster proceedings, transparent outlines, online, digital resolution, and broader accessibility to rights and programs that are vital to economic development and to building civil societies. The report identifies clear successes. For example, remote legal aid platforms are delivering tangible benefits in underserved communities, allowing individuals to resolve disputes more efficiently and at lower cost. Similarly, carefully implemented AI-driven case management tools have begun making real headway in reducing overloaded court dockets in some countries, increasing case handling times, and clearing backlogs. But the report also clearly points out that not every effort at digital solution lives up to its promise. Many technological incentives still stumble, platforms fail basic usability tests, initiatives rolled out without adequate preparation or oversight, or projects lose momentum, when local capacity or political commitment or support falters. Importantly, the report gives special attention to family justice, covering critical legal issues like custody, divorce, and domestic violence, because these issues are so common and important globally. Digital interventions in family justice aren't just about efficiency, they're about delivering timely solutions in situations where inadequacies can have significant social and economic consequences affecting the development agenda. Ultimately, the report emphasizes that digital solutions should prioritize people-centered justice, justice that focuses on the needs of individuals and communities within the justice system, ensuring that their circumstances and perspectives are central to the design and delivery of digital justice services. In this context, the report isn't merely a review of past or present initiatives, it's a foundation and practical guidance that countries, judicial systems, and legal service providers can directly apply to implement ICT solutions effectively and meaningfully. Specifically, by May this year, an assessment tool for ICT-driven reforms in family justice will be published. It will be an interactive resource meant to encourage direct engagement with practitioners, policymakers, and crucially, the people who will actually rely on these justice solutions. By making this tool widely accessible, the goal is to invite ongoing feedback from users and justice providers, continuously refining it to ensure the solutions remain user-centered and aligned with local circumstances. This is precisely the goal of the digital justice agenda, which must be accompanied by investments in training, capacity building for judiciaries, lawyers, and community legal aid providers. In closing, I'd emphasize that a lot remains to be done by all of us, whether at the World Bank, WJP, and other partner organizations, governments, judiciaries, legal professionals, and civil society in order to create a more efficient access to justice services for people and communities. So thank you, congratulations again on the report, and best wishes for the rich discussion to follow. Back to you.
Thank you, Chris, for setting the stage for today's discussion. It's inspiring to hear about the World Bank's leadership in leveraging digital technology to advance justice and development. Next, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Alejandro Ponce, the Executive Director of the World Justice Project, to share his insight on the report. Alex is a trained economist who has been instrumental in shaping World Justice Project research agenda since its early year and in developing the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index and led the creation of major data products. Prior to joining the World Justice Project, Alex worked as a researcher at Yale University and as an economist at the World Bank and the Mexican Banking and Securities Commission. He holds a BA in economics from ITAM in Mexico and an MA and PhD in economics from Stanford University. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Minsuka. It's an honor and pleasure to be here today. Welcome, everyone. Let me just start by context of this. Some years ago, we published a report highlighted that 5.1 billion people.
Alex, do you mind please speaking up louder, please?
Yes. But thank you, Minsuka, and thank you everyone for joining today. Welcome. Let me just put the report in perspective. A few years ago, we published a report that highlighted that about 5.1 billion people around the world lack meaningful access to justice. That is because they live in legal vulnerability or because whenever they face a legal problem, just call it being victim of a crime, having a problem with a neighbor, just having a problem of employment or debt or problems accessing government services, they cannot find a solution, or they get stuck in the process. And obviously, this affects people's lives and has important consequences on development outcomes, just health, education, and so on. That's the challenge. Technology, of course, offers a major opportunity to close this justice gap. Technology can take many forms. It's advancing very quickly, as we all have witnessed. But for this potential to be realized, justice technology must be people-centered. And that's probably the key idea of this project. So what does that mean? So that means that when we think about implementing, adopting, designing justice technology solution, we need to consider people and put people at the center. So what that means is we need to look at the justice journey. So that means consider when people just have a legal problem, what are the challenges that they are facing? What are the barriers that they are facing to accessing information, to getting advice, to accessing a dispute resolution mechanism, to enforcing a dispute resolution mechanism decision. So all of that throughout the justice journey, we need to be putting people at the center when really thinking about technology. So it means that when we design interventions or think about adopting technology interventions, we need to be thinking across the spectrum of this justice journey. There are a lot of different solutions. Some of them are provided by the private sector. Some of them may be provided by the public sector. But we need to consider the entire spectrum. So those are perhaps the two core ideas of this project, that we need to put the people at the center. We need to think about number one, and number two is we need to think about these broader sets of solutions across this justice journey. So the report that we are presenting today is really the first part of a broader project. The project aims to provide a framework to help policymakers, reformers, assess and design justice technology solutions that truly work for people. So it looks at common barriers across justice journey, explores a range of technology solutions and best practices, and importantly, identify factors that can shape the success or failure of the adoption of these technologies. So at the end of the day, the goal is to avoid, as Chris was mentioning, to adopt solutions that are flashy, but that don't meet people's needs and that don't have real impact. So the report is the result of a valuable collaboration with the legal vice presidency of the World Bank and the Korean World Bank Partnership Facility. They have been exceptional partners throughout this journey. We're grateful for their support and importantly for their leadership in adopting and continue to support just this justice reform agenda, this digitalization agenda in the current context. So these are important. It's important to take these steps. I mean, these are countries can make progress, and this progress can have real impact. It's important just that we continue to this work, and we appreciate the efforts that the bank continues to pursue. We look forward to continuing this collaboration. Finally, I would like to thank all the different teams involved. First, the WJP team, Daniela leading the Access to Justice team, Grace leading this first part of the project, the legal vice presidency of the World Bank, Chris, Francesca, Min-Soo, Kyung-Ming, and obviously our colleagues as well, just at the KWPF, for the hours, obviously, and effort that they have put into this project. So with that, thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Alex, for the thoughtful overview. It's wonderful to see such a strong partnership of advancing access to justice. Our next speaker is Grace Hulsman. Grace is a senior research associate on the World Justice Project Access to Justice research team, where she has contributed to research on the prevalence and impacts of civil legal needs, the justice gap, and opportunities for innovation in the justice sector. In addition to working with WJP, Grace is a young justice leader with NYU's Pathfinder for Peaceful Justice and Inclusive Societies. Today, Grace will present key findings from the report we are launching. Grace, thank you so much for being here at the World Bank. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mansuk. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm sharing a PowerPoint on the screen. If you cannot see it at any point or if the slides start lagging, please let us know in the chat so that we can remedy that. Before I get started, I just wanted to extend my thanks to our colleagues here at the World Bank for their partnership on this project and this event. Specifically, thank you to the World Bank Legal Vice Presidency, the KWPF, Christopher, for your opening remarks this morning, and thank you, Alex, as well, for setting the stage. I'd like to note, too, I'm joined here in person by Daniela Barba, WJP's Director of Access to Justice Research. As Alex mentioned in his opening remarks, this project is the first part of an ongoing collaboration between the World Justice Project, the World Bank Legal Vice Presidency, and the KWPF. This partnership originally began in 2022 and has evolved into a multi-phase project oriented towards supporting the use of justice technologies. As we mentioned, my presentation today will focus on highlighting the approach and key takeaways of this literature review. We know from WJP's research that access to justice remains out of reach for people around the world. As Alex mentioned, WJP's Measuring the Justice Gap report found that an estimated 5.1 billion people globally are in the justice gap, and that includes 1.5 billion people who cannot address their civil, administrative, or criminal justice needs. Globally, about 1 in 2 people have encountered civil or administrative justice needs. And we know that while justice problems are common, resolution is not. People often encounter barriers throughout their justice journeys that can make it harder or outright impossible for them to resolve their problems in a sufficient and accessible manner. Digital technologies are a tool that can help us improve access to justice for people around the world. Broadly speaking, many justice actors do understand that ICT-based tools can support their work, particularly on the supply side. ICT-based tools have been used in the justice sector for years, and the COVID-19 pandemic served as a push for justice actors to increase their usage of such technologies, largely out of necessity. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw an increase in the use of virtual hearings and other remote service provision in line with the social distancing protocol that were in place in many jurisdictions. However, despite some embrace of digital innovation, gaps persist, and specifically, there's a lack of systematic understanding about how we can use ICTs on the demand side, that is, to support people who have justice problems and are seeking support. We know that justice remains out of reach for people around the world. And in order to improve access to justice for people, we first need to understand what their justice journeys are. You'll see on the screen a graphic that is a simplified representation of the justice journey, but broadly speaking, the concept of a justice journey recognizes that when someone experiences a justice problem and that need first arises, there are multiple pathways and avenues through which that person can travel in order to resolve their problem. It's important to note that people can resolve their justice problem and finish their justice journey at any point. For some people, they're able to rather simply resolve their problem themselves without engaging with justice institutions. We actually know through the survey data that fewer than 1 in 5 people who have a justice problem engage with courts in order to resolve it. There is a potential to leverage technology at all stages of the justice journey, from the beginning of supporting people in not only understanding their legal rights, but identifying their problems. And technologies can also be used throughout to support people as they seek out legal advice, as they pursue mediation, whether formal or otherwise. Once their problem is resolved, people can use technology in order to ensure that the resolution is enforced and upheld properly. We've made reference to people-centered justice, and I want to take a moment to really clarify what we mean when we say people-centered justice. WJP's Access to Justice work and this collaboration specifically really emphasize a people-centered approach. Conventional approaches to thinking about and improving justice services center justice institutions, which can be courts, judiciaries, law enforcement, and other such actors. And taking a people-centered approach recognizes the importance of justice institutions. We are not in any way dismissing them. Rather, the people-centered approach twists the orientation a little bit to start from understanding what people experience and what they need. So taking this bottom-up approach allows us to have a more holistic and comprehensive view of what is happening in people's justice needs and in the justice sector. The people-centered approach is important for many reasons, one of which is, as I mentioned, most people don't engage with justice institutions, such as courts, when they have a justice problem. So it's important for us to look beyond justice institutions and understand how people can be and are experiencing problems beyond that. To highlight just quickly, this is a broad overview of the collaboration between WJP, the World Bank Legal Vice Presidency, and the KWPF. As Alex mentioned, this literature review represents the first step of the project. And as Christopher mentioned, come May, we look forward to sharing the assessment tool that we have been developing. Following that, we see the next stage of the project as being oriented towards piloting that assessment tool, and we'll be sharing more details about that as we're able to. So as part of this collaboration, the people-centered approach cross-cuts it throughout. And within this literature review specifically, we made sure that that people-centered concept was mainstreamed by applying the lens at every level of analysis, considering it not only with regard to the design, but also the implementation and evaluation of justice technologies. As examples of justice technologies and other research were identified, we mapped them based on 3 criteria. First, the stage or stages of the justice journey that they pertain to. Secondly, the types of justice problems that they target. And third, the users that they are oriented to, whether that is people seeking justice or people who are providing justice services. And this approach is important for multiple reasons. First, justice technologies continue to evolve rapidly, as I'm sure we all know. Think, for example, how drastically things have changed in recent years with the introduction of generative AI tools such as ChatGPT. So taking a people-centered approach can serve as a means of generating an evergreen framework through which actors can continue to evaluate new justice technologies, even as they continue to evolve and emerge in coming years. Secondly, it's important to emphasize the need for a people-centered approach in that we know that justice problems come in many different types. So for example, we have on the civil side, people can have family problems, housing problems, and they can range in severity. Some problems are not really serious at all, whereas others can have long-lasting impacts on people's livelihoods and well-beings. So the people-centered approach allows for us to consider the entire ecosystem of justice problems. I do want to note here that this project in particular largely focuses on civil justice. I do want to reference, of course, that there are a lot of opportunities and research on justice technologies in the criminal justice space. However, the scope of this discussion today and the report is largely focused on the civil justice space. The report seeks to do the following. First and foremost, to take stock of existing research on justice technologies. We reviewed over 100 sources from peer-reviewed journals, reports from think tanks and international organizations, and around the world in order to identify research from a geographically and economically diverse set of countries. In doing so, the report orients people to the global justice technology landscape. We also aim to evaluate not only the opportunities that are offered by justice technologies, but also to understand and identify what risks they come with and what the barriers are to their use. And finally, this literature review, as the first step of this collaboration, served to inform the initial steps of the development of our assessment tool. And I'll discuss that at the end to share a little bit more specifically about how this ties into that next step of the project. We have 4 research questions in which this project is rooted. The first 3, as you can see, directly reflect the people centricity lens of considering multiple types of needs, multiple types of users, and the various stages of the justice journey. We also seek to ask here, what are the other factors that are relevant with regard to the design, implementation, and impact of justice technologies? We know that justice technologies are not deployed in a vacuum, and we have to consider these broader environmental and systemic factors at play. Some of the main findings here are that, first and foremost, there's a lot of variance in the ways in which people talk about justice technologies. Some of the lingo can vary, whether we're talking about ICT-based justice solutions, justice technologies, justice tech. So in part of our research, we went through and tried to identify what types of definitions were out there in order to promote a coherent understanding as to what we're talking about. This definition shared on the screen, from Jason Touche is one of the definitions we identified. And I'm highlighting here because I think that it really gets at the people centricity component, in that it defines justice technology not only as a technology project that can be used in the administration of a justice system, but it's also something that can create access for people and increase their agency throughout their engagement with the justice system. We've also found that there are multiple types of ICTs that are used to deliver justice services. They can range from more basic technologies such as SMS or text messaging to more advanced applications of artificial intelligence. It's important to note that these types of technologies shown here on the stage, first, these are not the only types of technologies. These are just some examples for illustration. And secondly, these are not discrete categories. That is to say, we often see, for example, websites that will have built-in chatbots, or we have chatbots that leverage different types of artificial intelligence, ranging from more simple systems to those that leverage generative AI. So these are not meant to be sole types of technologies, but rather to identify some of the different puzzle pieces, so to say, that can be used to put together a justice innovation. We also find in the literature that justice technology may target specific needs. As I noted earlier, there are a lot of examples about the use of justice technology in the criminal sector. While we're not focusing on that here, I do want to note that literature and research does exist. Within the civil justice space, we find a lot of examples around the use of online dispute resolution as a very commonly used justice technology. It originated, in the consumer space as a way to mediate disputes between consumers and companies, but it has evolved and is now applied through different types of problems, including disputes with, for example, disputes related to housing. It could be used in familial disputes and other types of challenges. We also find that some tools are more common. So for example, there are many tools that we were able to identify from various contexts that focus on family justice issues, such as those related to separation and divorce, or navigating the legal and logistical aspects of death. The research indicates that there are some types of justice problems that may be a little better suited to technological intervention. So, for example, on the institutional side, we see that there is a lot of use of technology to improve back-end efficiency related to managing files and information and form completion. For users, some problems may be well suited to technological intervention if they tend to be more emotional, because using an ICT platform as a mediator between two parties can be a way to help minimize the escalation of tension and emotion. Justice technologies are applicable, and there are examples of them throughout the justice journey. This graphic is an abbreviated version of the justice journey, just for illustration. But as discussed earlier, we also see examples of how justice technologies can be used to improve legal capability and support post-resolution enforcement. There are many examples throughout the justice journey, and it's important to note, again, that these are not discrete categories. That is, we see examples of technologies such as chatbots, for example, can be used to provide legal information and can also support legal advice and assistance and representation. E-filing or online case management systems, similarly, can be used at various stages of the justice journey to support lawyers and other legal practitioners in providing justice services, whether it's in the form of legal aid or in supporting a client through mediation, investigation, and other steps. There are a lot of opportunities offered by justice technologies, and these are opportunities that are offered both to justice institutions and actors, and also to people seeking justice. Justice technologies can help improve the efficiency and efficacy of justice services. They can generate cost savings both for providers and for users. There's a number of examples of how justice technologies can improve the coverage of justice services. For example, in a context where people live in a more rural area, the use of virtual service provision can increase the coverage of those services and accessibility. Technology can also be used to improve the language accessibility of certain services, allowing for people of different linguistic backgrounds to utilize the services available to them. However, these opportunities are not without risks. We see that, for example, while technology can improve the coverage of justice services in some spaces, it also runs the risk of exclusion. For example, in some rural areas, justice technology could make services more accessible if they're provided virtually, but if people live in an area where they don't have an internet connection or they don't have reliable electricity, that actually can have the opposite effect. Similarly, there are concerns around trust and privacy when it comes to sharing personal and sensitive information in digital platforms. And there's a lot of research around how providers and users both need to be aware and careful of how they are utilizing technology as an intermediary with these matters. There are also barriers that can prevent the provision and implementation of justice services digitally. And those can include, for example, regulatory constraints that can make it more challenging for certain innovations to take hold. There can also be capacity and financial constraints. While justice technologies can create cost savings in the medium to long term, they can be more expensive sometimes in the initial short-term uptake. So there can be cost barriers at play. As I mentioned, justice technologies do not exist within a vacuum, and any justice actor seeking to implement them also has to be aware of the environment within which they operate. The research suggests that there are different factors that can shape the implementation and impact of justice technologies. And those are, among others, the digital divide, political will and regulation, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation. It's important to note that specifically with implementation and bringing it back to a people-centered approach, how justice technology is designed, created, and used matters. It's really important not to just say something is people-centered, but to ensure that that people-centricity is mainstreamed throughout the implementation of it. Furthermore, there's a need for increased monitoring and evaluation of justice technologies to encourage understanding not only of if a specific tool is working in its intended context, but also about how justice technologies can and should be used, because there are so many opportunities, but also risks. As we've discussed, these are the results of the first stage of the project. The next stage of the project, which we look forward to publishing in the coming months, is an assessment tool for ICT-driven family justice reform. Part of that assessment tool is a menu of justice technologies, which we have developed to support people who are interested in implementing justice innovations and identifying which types of technologies may be appropriate for their use. These 5 technologies that we are highlighting here, chatbots, online case management, guided information pathways, legal websites, and virtual legal advice, serve as 5 types of justice technologies, and we've identified them here based on these 4 criteria that you see on the screen, but also we have, in the next stage of the project, taken some of the findings from this literature review and complemented them through additional research and analysis to identify pain points in people's justice journeys in order to pick these 5 types of technologies that are particularly relevant in the case of family justice matters. It's important to note here that we've identified these types of technologies as being promising in part because they are user-oriented. These are tools that people seeking justice can engage directly with. They're examples of how do they work around the world. They aren't hypotheticals at this point. They are being utilized in many cases. They're adaptable. These types of tools can be deployed at different levels of technological complexity and in different contexts. And they also are scalable. So for example, if a justice actor is interested in deploying a chatbot, they could do so in a very small scale. For example, just having a mobile application that is focused only on one or two types of problems, or they could scale it up, embed it in their legal websites, use it to refer people to legal aid and other types of services. So in the next stage of this project, we look forward to sharing more about this menu of justice technologies and how it relates to the broader assessment tool. I'm going to close my presentation here to make sure we leave time for questions. But thank you very much, everybody, for your attention. And many thanks again to our colleagues for their partnership on this project. You can learn more about WJP and our work by visiting our website or our social media, as you see here. And you can also download the report from our website via the QR code. I think I'll leave it there, but I'll just say if anybody has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Grace, for such a comprehensive presentation of the report's findings. It's fascinating to see how technology is being leveraged to close the justice gap, people-centered approach, and the challenges we must navigate moving forward. Now we'll move on to our Q&A sessions. This is your opportunity to engage directly with our speakers. For our virtual participants, please type your question into the Q&A box on Teams. For those here in person, feel free to raise your hand.
Hi, William Romans from the Dispute Resolution Service and the Accountability Mechanism. We work with mediation and communities, and we'd be really interested to know if in your research so far you found any really successful sort of standout examples of mediation services being brought to rural communities in a developing context.
That's a great question. Thank you for that. There definitely are examples, and we highlight some of them in the report. And I think that especially when it comes to mediation, there are examples of how technology can be used both in supporting formal and informal types of mediation. For example, I'm trying to think off the top of my head to not misname something, but there are examples from, for example, within the African continent of the use of mediation and bringing it to communities. There are also some examples from within the United States. There's an organization whose name is escaping me, but I can follow up, that has used buses, for example, and obviously that's not a digital technology, but to travel to communities and then to use technology in that context to support mediation. So there definitely are some examples. We highlight some of them in the report, and I'd be happy to follow up with specific details.
Thank you.
Hi, my compliments for your presentation.
Thank you.
I'm just an intern here in the World Bank, but before to come here, I was working 15 years as a judge. I've been working 8 years as a chief justice at the district court. When I was judge, I was part of the body government of the region, the justice body government, of the region when I was working as a judge. And I experienced in my own person the digitalization process in a high developed country as Spain, when I came from. I think that I have a very good idea on the ground what is the justice and what kind of problems has the court of justice. And I'm fully agree with you that digitalization, it's an efficiency tool for improve the justice administration. But what I have seen in my experience is that there is a huge gap between digital tools and ITC and the reality of the people that come to the justice that used to be excluded people with social deficiencies, and that came justice between other reasons because they are suffering problems in their circumstances. So how do you go to face this problem between the application of the digitalization tools and the lack of capacity of most of the people that comes to justice? And I cannot imagine how could be in another countries with most deficiencies like can have Spain. So because Spain is a privileged country. So how do you going to address to that kinds of deficiencies?
That's a really great question. Thank you. I think the first thing I would say is your comment really emphasizes the importance of a people-centered approach, because when justice technologies are being designed and implemented, it is really important to consider not only what it can do for justice service providers and institutions and actors, but also for people. And that disconnect is, I think, sometimes evidence of the opportunity for more engagement with people on the ground and ensuring that, especially legal capability, is a very common barrier to justice. So I think obviously it depends on the context, and I can't speak to Spain specifically, but I would say that, we have seen in this project and in some of our other work as well, that there are opportunities for justice actors to, if they're pursuing innovations within justice systems for efficiency, to first keep in mind how that efficiency or how that project relates to people with justice problems, if at all, and to also think about what a more holistic access to justice approach may look like. So, for example, if there's a justice technology that's oriented towards helping people resolve their housing disputes, but if people don't understand what their housing rights are in order to identify that they have a dispute in the first place, that's a huge barrier. And I think that that could be an opportunity for there to be legal empowerment and legal capability initiatives in order to strengthen and support people in their legal capability. And whether that is done via the same technology initiative or via a parallel or complementary program would depend on the context. But again, I think it comes back to this idea of ensuring that people's problems, their needs, their capabilities, and what feels relevant to them is really centered in decision-making around technology.
Yeah, just for give you an example, when I was Chief Justice in the court and we introduced the digital case management, we were super happy because the number of cases decreased extremely. And it was not because there's not problems. And the problem was that in that moment, we created a barrier between the citizens and us, and only that can afford to pay a lawyer and that have the digital tools could access to the justice. And we have to introduce a lot of modifications to allow the paper access to justice at the same time that we are working with the digitalization. So sometimes it's not easy to face with that kind of problems. And I very agree that the people has to be the center of this approach, because other ways you can forget the problems that they can have.
And I think Daniela have a comment as
Thank
well.
you. Oh, yes, thank you for your question. I think it is an excellent point. And I fully agree in the sense that we do need to shift, of course, like that's the approach that we're following in our collaboration with the World Bank, with the Legal Vice Presidency. And so the idea here is kind of shifting also the way of engagement for the decision maker. I think that a lot of what the literature is telling us is that there has been scarce intentionality in the actual evaluation. So it's understandable that decision makers would want to increase efficiencies, because the fact is that there's scarce resources for justice, and this is across the world. But in a way, like for us to have ICT reform, it has to be something that is leveraged as part of larger reform. And guiding that larger reform, there are different kinds of assessments that need to be kind of part and parcel of justice reform, starting from assessing people's needs and really understanding in particular context and by type of problem what are the types of pain points that people when they're trying to access justice may find. And that is the kind of like the North Star that should drive what kind of technologies are the ones that are more suitable for a context. And then also an evaluation of precisely what kind of elements in the circumstances of this decision maker in their internal capacity might prevent them from having these ICTs being sustainable and effective for the goal, which is assessing, addressing people's needs. And so this is just, like part of the tools that we're producing right now in collaboration with the Korea World Bank Partnership Facility and the Legal Rights Vice Presidency. And yeah, thank you for your question. It preempted very well that point.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very informative and very comprehensive. I just had a small question for you. In the barriers section, you mentioned political will. Could you expand a little bit on that?
Sure, of course. So this will depend on context, but when any type of innovation is being pursued, sometimes there can be opposition to it in different ways. And in order to, pursue an innovation, whether it's just like within a smaller scale within an organization or whether it's a larger government-wide initiative, it's really important to have that buy-in and that support for relevant stakeholders and those involved. So that's what we meant by that. So for example, sometimes there can be one of the common regulatory barriers, for example, to the use of justice technology in the United States and in some other contexts are laws related to the unlicensed practice of law. And there are some jurisdictions that have actually created like exemptions or waivers in order to support innovation in this space. And in order to have that, right, you need to have the political will of having the relevant judiciary and legal actors on board to support it. So that's what we meant, is that it's, one person can't just unilaterally design and implement a justice technology without the buy-in and the support of, whether it's people within their organization or broader justice actors.
If I may add or share my opinions and
please.
Ask question at the same time. This has something to do with a political wills or barriers or something like that. And what do you think would be the biggest barrier? Like I believe the biggest barrier to justice digitalization is not a technical issue. We published a report about the digitalization of Korea justice system, and in that case, the most significant challenges were not related to technology. We discovered that even in countries with advanced IT technology, such systems are not often adopted or not well utilized. For example, many countries have e-litigation systems, but judges do not use them effectively. In Korea, the main challenge was overcoming the psychological and cultural reluctance of just judges. So the strategy to expand e-litigation began with a patent, demonstrating a thoughtful approach to scaling up the system. I believe this is also end up with people-centered justice. When we mention the people-centered, is usually meaning the people who need justice, like for the demands side. But I think it applies also to the officers, like the supplier side. So we should consider the people who work for the court or probably prosecution service as well when we think about the people-centered justice. So how do you perceive these findings, and what do you think is most important factors in overcoming these barriers to successfully implement the digital justice system?
Thank you. That is a great question, and I think one that is very important for everyone, for us to have front of mind in these conversations. I think that and there are examples of, when technologies and innovations are designed and implemented, highlighting the importance of, as we said, including the people who are, and considering the people who will be using the justice service. But to your point, it should also be whether it's people seeking justice or people who are using the technology because they provide the service. And that relates to similarly these questions around digital capability and how familiar people are with technology, because whether it's someone seeking justice or a judge providing justice, their own digital capability will inform if and how they use the tool. So I think we have found in some of our research, and as Daniela mentioned, we emphasize in our coming work, that there's the need to take this all into consideration when making these decisions. It's important to involve all stakeholders, including court officials, judges, people who work within the judiciary, lawyers, et cetera, in these consideration and diagnosis of the problem, as well as designing solutions. And I think there are opportunities when an innovation is being designed to complement it by a socialization initiative to make people feel comfortable and that they have to trust in the technology as well, because if they don't trust it, they won't use it. So I do think it's a great question. I think it can be complex. I don't mean to oversimplify it, and it definitely depends on the context, but it does underscore the need for really inclusive and participatory decision making around these topics.
Let's pick a question from virtual side. Paul Davidson had raised his hand. Paul, do you want to speak by yourself?
Congratulate colleagues at the World Bank. Sorry, you don't hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Wonderful, huh? Yes, my name is Paul Davidson. I am the Chief Technical Advisor of the UNDP Justice Project in Djibouti, and we are initiating e-justice here. And I want to take the opportunity to congratulate the World Justice Project and the World Bank, colleagues at the World Bank, for this important endeavor. And like for us, I mean, this experience initiating e-justice, we really felt alone, like fumbling in the dark. To see a report like this coming out is going to be tremendously useful. At the UDP side, so much resources and time have been lost trying to figure out how to proceed. And on that, I was actually thinking, because in my experience, I felt that this is kind of so fresh that some of the best experiences I've found and the best advice I found just talking to people who are doing similar kind of work as I. There may not be so much in terms of actual literature. So one suggestion or reflection is like whether for your next report, it would be good to do more interviews with people like in the field doing the stuff. Right. So that's one thing. Second thing, if you could advise, because like in GPT, it's a very interesting experience. None of the preconditions were there. So we kind of just had to start it with a tabula rasa, with like nothing here. So we are kind of working ahead, and we also want to start to develop knowledge piece on our experience. So if you could advise, even just through a bilateral discussion on a knowledge piece that could be relevant, that could be filling a knowledge gap, given your extensive experience of existing literature, that would be really useful for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Do you want to go and then I?
Sure. I think it's a great point, and I want to respond particularly to your first point about interviews and really the importance of engaging with people who are doing this work, who are using justice technologies, because we have found, and I'm sure you know in your own experience, so much of this is really context specific, and what works in one place isn't necessarily going to work in another. So it is really, really important for practitioners and those of us doing this work to engage with those communities. And I would say in the next stage of this project that we'll be sharing soon, we actually kind of took your advice preemptively and did engage in a number of interviews and consultations with experts in the field in order to get more of that perspective. So we're looking forward to sharing that, but I just wanted to thank you for sharing your experience, because we definitely appreciate it, and your point resonates.
It definitely does. And I think that in the next tools that we're going to be socializing is exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for getting the opinion of practitioners on the ground in the sense of how useful you find these tools, how would you refine them? And we're definitely, this is like a living, although this first report is building on literature that has been quite established.
Mhm.
The next products are really live documents and live tools that seek to be improved by precisely people like you. So thank you again.
All right.
Mitsuk, I'm so sorry. I have another meeting. I'll have to leave, but thank you so much. This was incredibly informative. And thank you for taking the time to organize this as well, Mitsuk. Thank you.
Thank you.
We all the interns has.
Well, thank you all.
So
Thank you very
let's
much.
wrap up this with the last question from online. Is okay. Could you talk a little bit more about scalability? It seems that we have the technological means to expand ICT to achieve greater access to justice. Yet many solutions usually do not survive the project period that funded them. What are some of these larger factors that policymakers and practitioners need to address to reach greater scale? From Deborah Mancini, MSI, Tetra Tech.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you, Deborah, for that question. The question of scalability is a very important one. And I think there are a few different factors at play. I think a common barrier that is surfaced in the literature is finances. I think that there is often a lack of financial resources to invest in justice technologies and justice services, more broadly speaking. So I think to your point that sometimes we see initiatives that come to an end after the initial project. I think in part that could be remedied through more investment in the space. I think another challenge sometimes with scalability can be, it's important in order to scale something. It's important to have more collaboration and integration across the justice sector. And I think one way that could be supported within a specific context could be, if there's a justice technology, for example, that is deployed by a local jurisdiction, there could be opportunities if there is the collaboration and the partnership with regional partners or partners at the national level, but that type of collaboration within the ecosystem can help support scalability. So those are the first two that will come to mind, but I know that there are other factors, and again, it can be a bit context specific, but there is a lot of room for not only further research here and what works and what supports scalability, but also further efforts to identify the projects that do work and support them in their continuation.
And if I may add, exactly like when thinking about this question of intentionality in figuring out what kind of technologies have most likelihood of success, I think that it is not necessarily common that actors on the ground start from thinking of their sustainability financially. And so, as Grace was saying, in the tools that we have been developing, that is one of the main factors we take into account. The fact that justice actors do not necessarily need to go alone, because we think of justice ecosystems. And so the idea is sort of also for justice actors to change the mindset, not only about thinking about starting from people's needs or people's legal justice needs, but also about thinking about their role in a larger justice ecosystem and how there can be gains to leverage from collaboration more broadly. So it's like a little bit more of a deeper change of mindset in using and applying these tools.
All right, it's 9:58, and thank you everyone who shared your questions and thoughts. And we appreciate your passion and interest. And before we conclude, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thanks to our speakers, Chris and Alex and Grace and Daniela for your robust interventions and Ishu who prepared this meeting. And lastly, reminder for our audience, if you haven't already, I encourage you to access the full report via the QR code on the flyers or the links shared in the chat for our online participants. And thank you again for joining. Oh, do we have the links in the chat?
I understand it.
We're gonna send it anyway. And thank you again for joining us today, whether in person or online. Let's continue working together to advance access to justice for all. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.